As was stated at the beginning of this chapter, cells come in many different shapes and sizes. Most human cells are about 10 to 15 micrometers in diameter. What does this even mean? 1 micrometer, or also sometimes called a micron, is equivalent to 1/1,000,000th of a meter, or something you've probably measured more recently, 1,000th of a millimeter. So if you know what a millimeter is, it's 1,000th of that. So super small, which is why we have to use microscopes to be able to see cells. They're so small, we cannot see them with the naked eye. Because they're so small, because there is a limit on how big they can get. As you saw in the previous video lecture, cells have to have organelles or subcellular structures to help them accomplish their function. And so the larger the cell is, the more of these components it's going to have. And at some point, there is a point of no return, if you will, when there's too much that needs to be held in order to support the function of the cell. So as the cell gets larger and larger, then at some point it would be too much for it to hold, and the cell can rupture from being too large. Another aspect of cells or characteristic of cells that make them remain really small is that as you increase the diameter of a cell, the volume is going to increase much more quickly than the surface area. And that puts a lot of pressure on the surface of the cell and makes it difficult to maintain well. So this is why we have cells that are not going to get very big. There are about 200 different types of cells in the human body, lots of shapes, sizes, and functions. So some examples we have here from a figure in your book. These cells here are all in the first row, are epithelial cells. We have squamous, cuboidal, columnar. In your lab, you've probably seen some of the differences, I hope, in the histology slides of how these cells look different. They're named after their shapes. In the columnar epithelial cells, they're like columns. Cuboidal cells are like little small cubes. Squamous cells have a square, flat shape. And their shapes are reflective in their function. Just like we talked about anatomy and physiology, the anatomy of these cells reflects their ability to carry out their function. So for instance, the flat squamous cells are thin and allow for things like gas exchange or nutrient exchange. Other cell shapes that we have polygonal, stellate. These are common in the nervous system. They have cell bodies that look kind of like stars, hence the name. Spheroidal cells, your white blood cells, So WBCs are examples of that. Red blood cells are discoidal. They're kind of almost like inner tubes that have the middle filled in. They're biconcave. Here you can see this fusiform or spindle shape. This is common in our smooth muscle cells. And then finally we have fibrous shapes. But again, as I mentioned, these are just a few of the many different cell shapes and sizes that we have. And again, just like anatomy and physiology, the shape is going to help enable the cell carry out its function. What are the basic components of any cell? They're usually pretty standard amongst all cells. All cells have a membrane. They have to have something that differentiates the inside from the outside. It's going to define the boundaries of the cell, and it's composed of proteins and lipids. There is cytoplasm, which is everything within the cell or between the cell membrane and the nucleus. So this contains a lot. It contains those subcellular structures, those organelles, the cytoskeleton, some items known as inclusions, a clear gelatinous fluid called cytosol, which we also sometimes refer to as intracellular fluid. Intra meaning enter, like inside the cell. And then even though this is outside of a cell, extracellular fluid is really, really important, as we'll learn throughout A&P. It's really important in helping the cell accomplish its function. So what is in the extracellular fluid, what it contains, is really important to the function of any cell. It contains tissue or interstitial fluid, so different from intra when we talk about intracellular fluid, which is within. Interstitial fluid is between. So interstitial is going to be between the tissues and between cells. Okay? Blood plasma is also surrounding a lot of these cells. Lymph, cerebrospinal fluid, those are just a few. But this is an overview of what is in a cell.